Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Idaho Department of Lands Technical Assistance webinar on the Community Wildfire Defense Grants. We're following up from the USDA Forest Service webinars hosted this week for the Western states and looking to provide you some information about Idaho's, as a state's technical assistance that will be provided for this grant program. Can we get a real quick mic check and screen check? Somebody just say you're good or a thumbs up or something of the sort.
You're good.
You're good.
Good.
Appreciate it. It's also nice to hear some voices on the other end so we don't feel like we're talking to ourselves here. Okay, couple of technical remarks. We are recording this webinar and we do plan on posting it to our webpage, our grants webpage at the Idaho Department of Lands. So it's always great to have a reference to go back to. And I would encourage you to keep an eye on that grants webpage in the coming months. We're going to hold all questions till the end of this presentation. We do have the ability to monitor the chat, but I would encourage that we keep those questions until the end. This is going to be a relatively short presentation in regards to the amount of slides and content we provide, because we do know that the USDA gave quite a lengthy webinar this week, and we're coming into this hoping that each of you had the opportunity to listen into that webinar. If not, it will be posted at the CWDG specific website for USDA. If there are project-specific questions, curiosities about a project you're considering, we can hold those to the end as well, but we would encourage that you keep those questions and request a separate meeting for us to work through those project-specific details with you. With that, we are going to start moving into the slides. My name is Corey Ivey. I'm the grant project coordinator for the Idaho Department of Lands and one of the primary contacts for the state for this specific program and our technical assistance. With me here today is my supervisor, Tyler Holfeltz. He's the Wildfire Risk Mitigation Program Manager. Looking at our list of participants, there are quite a few who I have not met before. So thank you for joining us and looking forward to hopefully working with you through this program for the first time. Couple of topics we're going to discuss today. We are going to do a real brief overview of CWDG. Again, we're following up from the USDA webinars this week. And if you haven't watched those webinars or you were not able to attend, we strongly encourage that you do so, because this webinar is not meant to replace the USDA's webinar, as that webinar was really geared towards the program itself and the application and the eligibility, so on and so forth. And we are not going to go into depth on any of those topics here today. We're going to talk about Idaho's engagement with the program, specifically Idaho Department of Lands as a state. And lastly, we're going to talk about application development and submission of the application, which includes steps in the process and deadlines. So to start off on an overview, again, this funding for CWDG is coming out of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, specifically Title VIII, which is the Natural Resources Related Infrastructure, Wildfire Management, and Ecosystem Restoration. This program is very similar to our traditional Forest Service state and private forestry programs. For those of you that are joining us that are familiar with the Western State Fire Managers Program or the HFR programs, this is very similar. We'll talk about the differences here later. What we're not going to cover is the entire program in itself, but we're going to highlight some of the components that we feel are the most important. And again, this is not meant to replace the USDA's webinar. So as soon as that's posted, if you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. I cannot encourage that anymore. Again, the USDA hosted their webinars this week. The first one was on August 8th. They noted it would be recorded. I checked this morning. It is not yet posted, but that does take some time. So be patient. And the link that is on this page is going to take you to where that recording was supposed to be placed. So keep this link in your back pocket. Keep referring back to it if you're waiting on that posting.
And it's worth noting to everybody that this presentation, as Corey noted, being recorded will also be posted to our webpage. So if you're having a hard time capturing some of the information, it will be available on our website after this webinar.
General eligibility, and this is something that we wanted to go back and highlight specifically because we hope that those of you joining us are either representing one of these eligible entities or are going to plan on working with one of these eligible entities. I'm not going to go through this list in its entirety. There is one piece that I do want to highlight, and that is potential applicants that may be Indian tribes. If you are joining us and you are representing an Indian tribe, you have two options for applying. There is an Indian tribe or Alaska Native Corporation specific notice of funding opportunity on grants.gov. You are eligible to apply directly through that notice directly to the USDA, or you can apply through us as the state forestry agency through the Western States Notice of Funding Opportunity. So you specifically have two options for accessing this funding. If there are any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to myself and I can help walk you through those two different notices. You'll notice on here that there is a section about eligible lands that is quite short. We as a state have looked through the long list of eligible lands provided by USDA in their guidance document. And what this boils down to is non-federal lands only, with the exception of trust lands. This was outlined and answered in great detail on the USDA webinar. So if you're looking at trust land specific lands under this grant program, I would strongly encourage you to go back and listen in on that piece of the webinar. They did dive into it pretty clearly. As a state agency, we are charged with ensuring that cooperators, applicants, and the like are aware of our planning efforts and our data sets, specifically the Idaho Forest Action Plan. All of our traditional funding and the CWDG funding do have a tie back to our state forest action plan, which outlines threats and benefits and a lot of other important information about how we as a state envision managing our forests. This specific program and projects within this program must further the priorities as outlined in that plan or the goals and strategies. Additionally, projects need to tie to the priority landscapes as outlined in the Forest Action Plan. Again, those of you familiar with our traditional grant programs are in tune with how we reference this information. If you are not familiar with these plans, there's going to be some links on the page here in a second. It is extremely important that you familiarize yourself with the plan and the goals and priorities as outlined, as this is a requirement of the applications for CWDG. I'm going to hand this over to Tyre to discuss our wildfire risk data that will become available.
There are two places that you can access wildfire risk data, or the potential for damage is a better way to think about this data. You can access it through the Forest Action Plan. The wildfire section of the Forest Action Plan was recently updated. That data will be forthcoming, and we will send out an email blast to all who are on this webinar, as well as to our grants cooperators and participants. So please make sure that your email address is listed in our chat box so that we capture you and can send this out to you as well. The other location that you can find this information is in the county wildfire preparedness plans. Every county in the state of Idaho has completed a county wildfire preparedness plan. Some of those plans are rolled into the county hazard mitigation plan. So they're not specifically called the county wildfire preparedness plans anymore, but they're the fire chapter in the hazard mitigation plan for the county. So if you can't immediately find it, that is your next stop. We do have several counties in the state that have outdated plans, and we'll address that here in a minute and what can be done to update those plans.
As Tyre mentioned, your email address is crucial in making sure that you're up to date on the data that we're going to be posting for your reference and use. Gov Delivery is a system that we utilize to do that with. And later on in this presentation, there's going to be a slide that shows you how you can register for Gov Delivery. Outside of CWDG, I'm going to highly encourage you register anyways, because we do push a lot of funding opportunities, including our traditional ones, through that platform. So we'll revisit that at the end of the presentation as well. As promised, here are the links for the Forest Action Plan and a tool called Idaho's Interactive Priority Landscape Area, or PLA map. Those familiar with our programs and our traditional funding are aware of this tool, and this is a semi-new tool that we put out to help cooperators and applicants determine what priority landscape area they are looking to implement their project work in. It's simple to use. It is on the Idaho Department of Lands website. Hover over forestry, click on grants, and towards the bottom, you'll see it under resources. When you click on this tool, there's a box on the left-hand side that asks you for the address of your project or simply the GPS coordinates. You can type in those coordinates into that box, and it will automatically drop a pin on the map, highlight the priority landscape area, and explain or describe what priority landscape area you will fall in. For instance, if I type in coordinates in the Coeur d'Alene area, the pin is automatically going to drop and tell me that I am in the Panhandle priority landscape area. So super easy to use. And you will definitely need this information to be able to outline the PLA or SLA special landscape area in your application. Couple of additional program specific reminders. Again, if you're familiar with Western states, CWDG is looking to fund activities that fall within that Western State Fire Managers hazard fuels, hazard mitigation, wildfire mitigation program. There are basic activities that include mitigation work, hazard fuel reduction on the ground, education and outreach, planning components that are all also fundable under CWDG. CWDG has two primary objectives with it. They're looking to fund mitigation projects or fuels reduction projects and planning projects. But there are some additional project types that fall within those categories, such as planning for CWPPs, trainings and exercises, zoning and planning, codes, regulations, development, roofing ordinances, so on and so forth. They fit under both the mitigation and planning categories. Equipment is also fundable under this program, but I will stress that there are strings attached if you are looking to purchase equipment, and that includes some pretty heavy tracking. Anything purchased with federal funds does require some tracking components. So please keep that in mind and be sure to ask questions if that's the route you're trying to go. There are construction specific allowables under this program too, which you'll note on this slide. Is considered the dry hydrants. Dry hydrants are eligible, but also please be aware that if you are looking to fund dry hydrants and that construction specific piece, there are additional requirements that fall under the Davis-Bacon Act. I'm not going to go into detail on what that is. The guidance document provided by USDA for this program does explain that. It explains the training that's required as part of this as well. The guidance also thoroughly explains that specific construction component as eligible under this program. Another piece to note is that there's likely a set way that this funding is going to come down. And what I'm referring to is that it is highly likely that this will be a reimbursement-based grant. If you're not familiar with what that means, essentially it's that you front the costs. Now, we're not 100% positive of this, but I wanted to put this out there. We wanted to put this out there to ensure that you are ready and geared to ask the appropriate questions before you apply for this funding. So you understand how the money is going to come down to you, if it's going to be lump sum, if you're going to have to request reimbursement, so on and so forth. So ensure that you're asking those questions as well. Another eligibility piece or important piece to make note of is that there is some data that they're referring to that has to do with the Social Vulnerability Index. And this specifically ties to the match waiver that you might be eligible for depending on what county you fall in. Now, on our initial observations and our initial research into this eligibility component, it would appear that we may have 4 counties that would fall under or above the 0.75 minimum requirement for SVI. This is something that we would note applicants will need to verify on their own. If they do fall under or above that threshold and are eligible for match waiver, that is something that would come as a final application component if the project is awarded for funding. So again, if you fall in these 4 counties here on the screen and you have interest in seeking a match waiver, ensure to do some additional research on your own to figure out what that entails and what that process is going to look like. USDA on their webinar noted that there was likely going to be additional posts to their website for resources regarding underserved definitions, low income thresholds, and various data sets that they will consider allowable when you are working through the applications and trying to prove or note that you are planning a project in an underserved community. So it doesn't appear that those additional resources have been posted on the website yet with what I looked at this morning, but those components, those reference documents should be coming out soon. So again, keep that USDA CWDG website link in your back pocket, bookmark it on your website header, on your Google, whatever website browser you use, so you can reference back to it. Couple of additional reminders specific to CWPPs, and I'm going to hand this one over to Tyre to talk CWPP projects.
CWPPs are an allowable fundable project type within the CWDG programs. You're able to update a county wildfire preparedness plan, or CWPP, if it is older than 10 years. The importance of this is that you cannot seek funding if your CWPP is older than 10 years old to implement the projects that are listed in that particular plan. You'll note that we cannot offer funding, or funding is not offered to plans that are less than 5 years old for updating. Now, the standards for those CWPPs are held and maintained by the state of Idaho, specifically the state forester, and I represent the state forester in this particular endeavor. And so if you're interested in doing a county wildfire protection plan or preparedness plan, please make sure that you contact me first, because the reality is that you may not need any funding to do the plan based upon the criteria that we have set forth for those plans, unless you're looking at integrating it into your hazard mitigation plan, at which point, yes, you should likely seek additional funding so that you can integrate that into the county hazard mitigation plan. Those plan requirements were originally set out by the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, and the state forester has authorized a few additional elements above and beyond that to ensure that we have usable plans. So not doorstops, but usable plans. If you have any questions on that, please feel free to get a hold of me.
Okie doke. This is a real quick section that outlines what our role is in CWDG. So the Idaho Department of Lands, as a state forestry agency, did what's called a partial opt-in. States across the nation had the option to opt out and leave this to USDA. They could partially opt in, which is the technical assistance for applicants, which is where Idaho Department of Lands is sitting on this specific program, or they could completely opt in and run this like we would our traditional funding through the state and private forestry programs, which means that we would have been the initial or the applicant, so on and so forth. Idaho decided to do a partial opt-in, so we're receiving a minimal amount of funding to provide technical assistance, which is not normal in comparison to our traditional methods for those familiar. Partial opt-in, what does that mean? What it means is that we are not the applicant and we are not the fiscal agent, which means that all correspondence in regards to reimbursements, in regards to funding, so on and so forth, are going to be direct with USDA. We are the gatekeeper for cwdg.forestrygrants.org. That is the platform for which applications are going to be submitted. The gatekeeper essentially means that in order to submit an application to the CWDG Forestry Grants portal, we have to provide access via a code for you to upload your information, and then we will submit it. I'll go into greater detail on that in the next couple of slides. Partial opt-in also means that we are available to assist during project implementation if your project is awarded. So once we work through the application process and the Washington office goes through their award notifications, when you're actually starting to hit the ground, IDO will be available to answer questions and provide some technical assistance during that phase. The big one here is that IDL is not the grant author. Traditionally, I would assist cooperators in great detail on the development of their applications. We do not have the capacity nor the funding to support those efforts at the state level for this program at this time. So applicants will be required to populate the application according to the guidance document and the scoring rubric on their own. We are happy to provide general feedback, do a review of the application, and provide general guidance and our recommendations towards the project, but we will not be actually typing anything in the boxes or editing the application. So please keep that in the back of your mind and plan for time in regards to your efforts that will be needed to populate the applications. The last section here is the important details, and that is how does this actually work? So how are you going to be working with us, the State Forestry Agency, IDL, to develop and submit your applications in the portal? The first step is to send an email to Tyre and myself, and our contact information will be at the end of this presentation as well, with a request for an access code for the portal. With that request, for those of you that already sent us a request, we would ask you resend it. We will need a project title. In order for us to provide you a code, we have to title the project because that is how we sort it in the portal itself. So we'll need a project title. In addition to that, please send us a short, brief, maybe 1 to 2 sentences description of what your project's going to be. Requesting funding for a CWPP update, or requesting funding for on-the-ground hazard fuel reduction, so on and so forth. It doesn't need to be long, doesn't need to be in great detail, just something that gives us an idea of what you're shooting for, so we can kind of keep a running total of what's going on across the state. That's truly where we're at as a forestry agency, is having that knowledge of what kind of projects are hitting the ground. We will go in and we will create a project in the forestrygrants.gov portal or website, and that will populate a link or an access code, and we will send that to you as the applicant. If you click on that link in the email, it will bring you directly to your application in the portal. There is a PDF version of the application that's available on the USDA CWDG website. We strongly encourage that you use that PDF to draft out your project application instead of trying to do it directly in the portal. There's always concerns and risks involved with doing your initial draft online, i.e. potentially losing everything you've written. So definitely download that PDF, work off of that, and then once you feel you're in a good place to finally upload the narratives for the final submission, then go into the portal and do it that way. But again, use that PDF. The important piece with using that PDF to draft your application is it is meant to be used alongside the guidance document. The guidance has everything you need to put in every box. It has a scoring rubric. It's going to tell you exactly how reviewers are going to look at the narratives you provide and what pieces or components they're going to be looking for. So don't just rely on the little header at the top of each section on the application to tell you what to put in there. Go back, use the guidance document, and refer back and forth the entire time you're drafting your application. Once you get to a point where you've drafted your application and you've uploaded all those narratives into that portal via the link that we provided you, you will need to notify us that it is complete. you as the applicant do not have access to finally or officially submit your application. That is that whole gatekeeper concept that I described earlier. The State Forestry Agency is the only one that is able to submit the application, and that's going to be Tyre or myself. So when it's done and done 100%, that's when you can submit and ask for us to go in and officially submit that application. And we'll send you a note back noting that it was officially submitted. So all those steps come with deadlines. And this is a screen that I would say, if you have the ability to just screenshot it, print it out, keep it with you, put the dates on your calendar, this is the one to do that with. The last date for applicants to request an access code or link to the online application is going to be September 23rd by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Any asks or requests for an access code beyond that date will not be able to be granted because of our capacity and ability to meet potentially hundreds of applications and the needs at this point. So please do not ask for access after that date of September 23rd. The last date to request submission of a final application. So once you've gone through the draft and you've completely uploaded the narratives online in the portal with that link, the last date for you to ask for us to submit it is going to be October 5th by 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That allows us as the state agency 2 days to make sure we have all of the applications submitted, and we are addressing all of those requests for final submission. If there's any questions or concerns about these dates, please don't hesitate to reach out to Tyre or myself, and we will address those questions via email. Really important note here, the state is not going to make any determination of eligibility or efficacy during this process. What that means is that we're not going to be reading through the applications in their entirety to determine whether or not your project is eligible, whether or not you as an agency or organization is eligible, or whether or not the activities associated are allowable, or if there's any eligibility issues or anything of the sort during this process. There's the potential for there to be a lot of applications coming to us with asks for submission, and we really truly do not have funding nor capacity to go through them all in their entirety. So it's on the applicants to make sure that they're following the eligibility rules and the allowables according to activities for the application process. Tara, did you want to add anything to that?
No.
So we're not going to go through the entire application because that's what the USDA did on their webinar this week. Again, go back and look at that webinar once it's posted if you're curious on their input on each of the boxes. But there are 2 boxes that we want to talk to real quick. One is the very first box at the top of the application, which is going to ask you for a keyword. This word should be something, it's a single word that ties to your project. And this also is the main word that shows up in the portal when we're looking through our applications and when the Forest Service is on their end. Please don't make this word mitigation or fuels reduction or anything generic. Try and tie it to your specific project if you can. Also, at this current point in time, please do not put anything in the priority box. Those are the only 2 boxes in this section that you will have access to plug anything in. Right now, just leave priority blank. If that changes, we'll make sure to let everybody know. The second box that we want to talk to is the collaboration box. It is really important here that you only include participants that you've agreed with will take part in your project activities. And that includes state and federal agencies. For those familiar with Western State Fire Managers and the way that we work through that and IDEO providing technical assistance, so on and so forth, we would advise that you don't copy the way that that's done because this box is also very different in the required elements. So just again, ensure that if you're noting folks in here or agencies or organizations that are going to participate in this project, that they are fully on board and aware of what they are being committed to as outlined in this box.
The reason that Corey is so adamantly speaking to this particular point is that the application, and we'll close with the statement as well here in just a moment for reiteration purposes, but the application is to as we understand it, potentially an auditable standard, meaning if you put it in the application, you are going to be responsible for the implementation of it. And if you've listed collaborators and indicated that they will be contributing in some way, shape, or form to the project, the expectation is that they will actually be contributing that element or piece to the project to an auditable standard. We're talking federal OMB service auditing.
Okay. Last slide here before we pop into questions. This is the sign up or the stay informed piece of the Idaho Department of Lands grants webpage, where you can plug in your email address here and it puts you into this grant cooperator specific pool under Gov Delivery, where we can send emails out. It's kind of like a MailChimp per se, but Gov Delivery is specific for government agencies. There's not a lot of emails that come through this, so it's not going to fill up your inbox. It's not a lot of spam. It's specific to our grant program news. So if you would like to stay in the know on not only CWDG and the risk data and everything else that'll be coming up, but also our traditional grants, this is the best way to do it. Plug in if you actually use the QR code on the screen, it does work. That will take you directly to the Stay Informed website. You go down, you plug in your information, and it will put you straight into the database. So I highly encourage folks to use this QR code or visit our website and register. Okay, that's all we have for slides and content. At this point in time, we are happy to answer some program specific questions. And depending on time and participants left, we may be able to, or I may be able to jump into some project specific questions. So if you can utilize, I'll actually continue to share the screen, but if you can utilize a hand raise function, if you have a question, that's probably going to be the best way so we're not overlapping each other. Tony, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hey, thanks guys. Thanks for putting this together. We really appreciate it. Just a couple of questions on the timeframes. The timeframes that are coming up, obviously it's a fairly short window. Is that just for projects that are going to be starting in a particular year? Is this going to be, we can bring new projects next year? How are those timeframes working with different sized projects?
The funding availability was authorized for 5 years. So this is the first open period. What we don't know is in the coming funding cycles, if this period will change or not, because they were legislatively mandated to roll this thing out as quickly as they have. We may see some changes moving forward programmatically with the dates, as well as the fundable elements within the program. So if your project is not fully developed this year, you will have an opportunity, at least for what we understand right now, the next 4 years to submit an application for a particular project that you are endeavoring to seek funding for. Jerry?
Hey, Tyre. Hey, Corey. Hey, real quick. So on the application, we can put multiple projects under one application. We just need one project title, correct?
It's a bit complicated. And this is one that was gone back and forth on the CWDG webinar. And I would encourage you to maybe schedule a meeting with me to talk specifically about the projects, because it really depends on where the projects are going to be located. Jerry, for you, I would guess they're all going to be in the same county, and you'll probably be okay to put them in one. But again, it really depends for the rest of the folks here as well. It really depends on the type of project and what you're aiming to do. So if you're looking to lump multiple projects into one application, please reach out to me and I will do my best to guide you in the right direction to set you up as best as possible.
And if we can't answer that, we've got Forest Service representation that can help us work through that process as well. But the gist of the issue is that if you have multiple projects, then they require multiple budgets as well as multiple narratives associated with those individual projects, even if they're lumped together.
Copy.
And
Thank you.
the risk data for those areas could also vary. So it does get a little bit sticky depending on what you're trying to do.
Hannah?
Yeah, so I was been looking at the low income and data, and so you guys aren't determining our eligibility for that. You know, I assume, so we should just, if we have questions, contact the email on the Forest Service website. Is that, so that's one question. Then a second question is, with all of these webinars and the information they haven't put on the website, will you guys be emailing us when it's on there, or should we just be checking periodically?
So for your first question about low income, they are going to come forward with some resources that help to better define what that means and where you can determine your eligibility when it comes to that specific item, I guess we'll call it.
Yeah.
They've had a lot of conversations at the federal level on exactly what that definition means. And I think that's playing into the availability of those resources at this current moment in time. So I will be monitoring the websites, but I would encourage that as an applicant, you maintain a level of awareness on the resources that they're providing as well, because you may find them faster than I do. I did put an ask in for a cheat sheet or a quick reference sheet or something of the sort that just provides links for low income, links for data for underserved communities, links for data for SVI, so on and so forth. I don't know if that will come out in this funding year or not. But I would imagine that the references they're trying to put together for everybody will be something similar to that. That's what I've gathered across the various webinars that we've sat in on as a state agency.
Okay, and then
Yeah, I'll add to what Corey has shared, Hannah, is that there's a lot of self-determination on some of these features that they've asked for verification of whether or not you fit into a certain category or not, which is why in the utilization of the tool, you need to be very explicit about which tool you used and how you came up with that information as part of the narrative that you include within the application body itself.
okay, so for instance, I was looking at low income and I followed their links and I got that Pocatello was like 79.9%, which is of the state median income, which is under their 80% threshold. But my understanding is in order to use that to apply for a waiver of any sort, like I submit the grant with this application for a match waiver and then cross my fingers, right? That I get the grant and that the match waiver is approved.
So the understanding that we have is that the request for a waiver won't come until after, and that's because there's no way outside of the narratives in the application itself for the Western states, there is no way to upload additional documents. So traditional to our Western states application process, what you've got on that application is what you can submit in narrative form only. There's no attachments. So the way we understand it is that if you're going to be looking for that waiver, that eligibility or match waiver in the end, outline that as part of your narrative and substantiate it, justify it via those various resources that you've been looking at. And then if it's awarded, there's a whole lot of documents as part of the final application. You have to provide them. And it's our understanding that that waiver would be one of those.
Okay.
Does that help?
That helps. Thanks.
Did we answer both of your questions or just the first one?
No, that's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Brad, I see that you came off mute. Did you have a question that you'd like to pose?
Yeah, thanks, Tyre. Sorry, I couldn't find my hand
That's
raising
okay.
button. So just to be clear, if a county is already in the process of updating their CWPP, and they may or may not have it done by those October deadlines, are they eligible to put in an application for a project even with their CWPP in progress and not having been finalized yet? Or is that something we should be striving to finish prior to those deadlines so they could be eligible?
I believe that was actually one of the questions that was asked during the webinar, and they did not provide an outright answer. But my inclination is that the CWPP will need to be completed before an award can be made. So if a project is recommended for funding, that the CWPP would need to be complete in its entirety before an award could be made. That's a pretty standard practice in most of the Western states on how we already utilize and manage the traditional funding sources that we are supporting communities with.
Okay, so they could potentially put in the application and maybe finalize the plan prior to their application being approved. Or not following.
Yeah. So application versus award are two very different things. So the application period, yes, you could put in an application as long as you're working on your CWPP. And mind you, we're speaking on opinion here because we don't have an actual answer yet from these folks.
Right.
But the award, meaning we're going to give you money to implement the project that you asked for in your application, that before an award can happen, the CWPP has to be completed. And that period will likely be by June of next year. I can't imagine that they're going to be able to roll this funding out much faster than that. Maybe.
Right. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Thanks, Tyler.
Yep. And we actually have a great resource on this webinar with us. CJ is here. Do you have any thoughts that you would like to add to what I just shared, or anything else you would like to share with the participants in the webinar today?
Yeah, thanks, Tyre. So I would echo Tyre's and Corey's sentiments there that the narrative really rules here. If you don't know if you're eligible, if you don't know if you're going to meet the eligibility for a match waiver, all these different things, state that in the narrative. You can delay your application as long as you can to meet the deadlines that you saw on that slide. So I guess my advice would be in alignment with Tyre's and Corey's. The narrative is where you can explain your situation and describe your project with as much detail as you can. And if you need to wait a little longer before you know any more details, delay your application. We also, on the CWDG webpage, there's an email that will go directly to the grants and agreements staff within USDA that will be writing these agreements between the USDA and the awarded parties. And they've made themselves available for questions as well. So utilize all of the resources at hand. And the narrative is where, if you feel there's some questions or there's some gray areas, state those in those applications. And that's about the best advice I can offer at this time.
Great. Thanks, CJ.
You bet.
I appreciate it. CJ, if I might add, for those that do have those eligibility specific questions, or they have those level of questions in regards to the agreement side that we may not be able to answer at our state level, if you wouldn't mind CCing us, that way if an answer is provided, we may better be able to support those that might have that same question. If it comes to us, that would be beneficial, I think, to everybody across the state who's looking at this program.
I don't see any more hands or unmuted mics.
Jerry?
Oh, Jerry,
Hey, one more quick question. I'm sorry.
you don't
Hey,
have quick questions and don't be sorry.
Come on.
Will the grant funding allow for the hiring of like seasonal fuels crews, that kind of thing?
My understanding, Jerry, is that the implementation of the work, as long as you're not creating or expanding workforce, that you should be able to do it. So seasonal work labor force is not considered capacity enhancement.
Perfect, thank you.
And I would add, ensure that those personnel are explicitly tied in your narrative to project activities.
Copy, thank you.
Yep. Let's go with Gavin. We'll get to you, Hannah.
Yep, good afternoon. I just had a quick question about a specific project area. I need to make sure, my understanding is that if I have a project area, it has to be covered in it's a CWPP or in the hazard mitigation plan. My only question on that is if I find out that it's not, or it's not specifically recorded, what information do you need in the plan, CWPP or hazard mitigation plan, to ensure that project area is eligible?
You have a couple of options available to you. One is to work specifically with the plan administrator. In Idaho, that is most often the county emergency manager or director, whichever title that they have been given, and to work with them to amend that plan. And literally that means that you send an email to them with the project, they receive it. They work with the fire working group locally to ensure that they're all okay with that addition, and then it's done. And that individual should email me to let me know that there was an update so that I can see that there was an update, as I am the final approver and or signatory entity on those plans for them all here in the state of Idaho. If you do not know who that plan administrator is.
Nope, I can stop you right there. I got him. I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure you no need to go on the other one. Good copy. I appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Yeah. Hannah.
Yeah, just a question about equipment purchases and the tracking of it. And does that compare to similar restrictions with, I can't remember if it's the HFR or WFM grants that IDL manages, or is it a whole different set of tracking requirements?
The equipment is comparable in allowability to that which would be within the Western State Fire Managers and frankly HFR. It's just something that we don't offer in the state as part of that program administration. But its tracking means that you have to have an annual audit and review of it. You have to provide that information to the regional office to certify that you still own and are using that equipment as intended as part of the original grant application. The equipment purchase cannot be for fire response. It can only be for mitigation practices. Okay. So if you're looking to pick up a couple of fire engines, not going to happen. But if you'd like a whole fleet of chippers, sure, why not?
Okay, but we will have to do annual tracking for the life of the chippers.
Yes, until it reaches its designated depreciation value, at which point the Forest Service will divest their interest in it, and then you all, the cooperators with the Forest Service, will be able to utilize it in any way, shape, or form that you desire, or dispose of it. And that disposal process is very descriptive. Even if the Forest Service divests their interest in it, you still have to involve the Forest Service in the disposal of that equipment.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Thanks.
I would note too that the guidance document does a really good job of outlining in the table of examples of hazardous fuel reduction restoration projects, those eligible and ineligible activities and purchases. the general rule of thumb in my reading and understanding of this is that the equipment needs to be related to mitigation and or the use of prescribed fire. So yes, suppression equipment and apparatus are a no. Drones are also a no, and fire suppression training unrelated to requirements for prescribed fire qualifications is also a no. So make sure that you're lining up with the eligible and ineligible activities and equipment purchases in that table.
Thank you very much.
CJ, I see that you came off mute again. Did you have some additional thoughts on the equipment that you wanted to share?
No, I didn't, only to say that I know that generally nationwide, there's a lack of people working boots on the ground. So I know that a lot of strategies for projects will be to purchase equipment. So it's going to be something that comes up. It's going to be a very common request in these applications. So following those guidelines is pretty key, and there'll be a lot of decisions that are made, really ranking in the scoring and ranking that'll be done by these NASF committees regarding equipment purchases. So describe on your project what you need, and if it's equipment that fits your bill, put that into your plan.
CJ, because in the other two programs, we have to seek pre-approval from the Forest Service in those applications. Is that required in this particular grant application? So they have to note that pre-approval.
Correct. I don't see any other, that's just Code of Federal Regulations. So I don't see that as being any different than any other grant award that over $5,000 for individual pieces of equipment. Then those requests, that has to be approved. In this case, it'll be approved by me. So I'll need a write-up of what you're requesting the equipment for. And if it aligns with your grants, that's really the biggest question that I have, and meets the authorities within the legislation, we can approve the purchase. And until, just as Tyre said, until the depreciated value is below 5,000, it is subject to an annual reporting.
CJ, will you be handling the whole state, or will Julie Campbell handle the Region 4 area of Idaho for that pre-approval on equipment?
Julie and I just had a chance to discuss this just a couple of days ago. So I'll be handling all the R1. So the northern, those lands associated, the Nez Perce Clearwater Forest. If you folks don't know the boundaries, I'll be doing the Region 1 requests, the awards, and Julie will be doing the Region 4 awards.
If you get stuck in that process and you think, do I need pre-approval, please reach out to Corey and I, and we'll help guide you through that.
Thanks, CJ. Appreciate your help with some of these out of the box questions.
Absolutely. Anytime. I may not know the answer, but I work for you. So please, any questions you need to shoot my way, please don't hesitate.
Thank you so much for joining us and your interest in this, and look for that recording on our grants webpage. I will get it up as soon as possible. It always takes a handful of days, so just be patient. And of course, fire any other questions to us as you need. Thank you again.